Now broadcasting. Okay, good afternoon, everyone that can already hear me. I am just waiting for the ticker to stop as participants join. So when it begins to level off, we'll start. We'll give it about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, great. Okay, it looks like it's leveled off, so so we'll get started. So thank you very much to everyone that's joining us today for this webinar. My name's Anthony Buchan. I'm head of programme for Resource London at LWARB. Today's webinar is about the flats recycling package cost benefit analysis tool. And so today you're going to hear from Gemma Scott from Resource London. You're going to hear from Lawrence and Rob from Alma Economics, who are our partner in developing this tool. And also on the webinar later on for the Q&A session, you'll also is Eric from Alma Economics. Just a few housekeeping, I suppose, is the right way of putting it, even though in a virtual world. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, if I could ask that you post them into the Q&A section on the Zoom functions. So there's a chat function and there's also a Q&A function. So if I could ask if you could post your questions into the Q&A function, I'll be keeping track of those and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So I'll curate those and I will direct them to the appropriate people on the webinar today. So there we are. This is the agenda that I've already mentioned. So you're going to hear first of all from Gemma Scott, bit of more detail on the development of the flats recycling package, and then Alma Economics, Rob and Lawrence are going to talk you through the cost benefit analysis tool, and there'll be a demo of that tool as well. And then we'll have questions and we'll aim to be finished by 3 o'clock. So just, I think many of you or most of you here today will be aware of LWARB, but for those of you that might be from outside London, we are a partnership with the Mayor of London and the London boroughs, and our aim is to help transition to a low carbon circular economy, and in doing that we collaborate with businesses, government, waste authorities, academia and third sector. One of our aims is to obviously minimise the amount of waste London produce and maximise the amount of recycling from the waste that is left over. And in doing that, one of the key areas that we have been focusing on in the last couple of years is flats recycling. It's a serious problem in London. Some local authorities have up to 80% flatted properties, and recycling rates from those flats are often much lower than we would see from curbside properties. And so for the last 2 years, we've been delivering a project in partnership with 6 London boroughs and with the Peabody Housing Association to look at ways in which we can drive up recycling rates in flats. And at the end of last year, we launched, or we published a comprehensive report of that study, and also launched a toolkit to help local authorities implement the measures that we had found that worked, primarily the flats recycling package, which I'm going to pass on to Gemma now, who will talk you through the findings of that research, what the flats recycling package is, and where we've taken that in order to develop the cost benefit analysis tool. So Gemma, over to you.
Great, thank you and welcome everybody. Next slide, please, Anthony. So just wanted to talk you through the flats recycling package. Now, basically, we undertook over 100 inventories of estates across the 6 authorities that we were working with in the project, and we found that there were, varying degrees of levels of service, quality of service, lots of issues around poor signage, overflowing bins, big issues with bulky waste, etc. So we used this knowledge together with some very in-depth research with residents to kind of understand what the key challenges were that residents were facing, and therefore how we could fix those challenges. And the thing that came out as the most effective at improving recycling rates as part of that project was something that we're calling the flats recycling package. You can see in front of you there's the list of things that covers. But basically, in a nutshell, it's improving the look and usability and feel of the recycling and waste sites on estates in general. So things like making sure that your bins and bin areas are clean and well maintained at all times, making sure that you've got enough collections so that you haven't got bins overflowing. So when residents get to the bins after diligently recycling in their homes, they're not demotivated and put off from doing it again by the fact that the bins are overflowing. Making sure you've got appropriate apertures on the bins, on the top of the bins, to make sure that they can take a bag of recycling, because residents were telling us that's what they were using. And they're actually reverse lidded bins as well. Collection of the 6 main recyclables, making sure there's clear and visible signage on and above the bins, making sure they're conveniently located for residents as well. So on exit routes and entrance routes where people are naturally going to be walking past. And then on terms of the communication side, ensuring that a recycling leaflet is sent to residents every year, and that there are posters highlighting key recycling messages in communal areas, such as notice boards in lobbies, and also letting residents know what to do with their bulky waste. It's a significant issue for many of the flats that we looked at. Next slide, please, Anthony. So this slide here just shows you the flats recycling package in action, as it were. So how the bins look, what the signage is looking like. The photos there at the bottom show you some line painting that we did in some of the bin rooms where it wasn't always necessarily clear to the crews or to the residents exactly where to be going to deposit different types of waste. And then the next slide, please. This next slide just shows you some examples of the communications that we used for the project. Next slide, please. So, as Anthony's already mentioned, this flats recycling package was proven as part of the project to have significant impacts on increasing recycling rates, increasing capture rates, and decreasing contamination levels as well. So one of the key questions that we were getting once the report was actually out there, was launched, is what is it going to cost us, our authority or our housing association, to bring an individual estate or multiple estates up to that flats recycling package standard. So hence why we got Alma Consulting on board, Alma Economics on board, to help us develop a cost benefit tool. And we didn't do it on our own. It's really important to say that the tool has been devised with an advisory group. So you can see there's a number of individuals from London boroughs. I won't go through them all now because you can see them there, as well as housing associations as well, because I think it's really key when it comes to improvements in purpose-built flats and estates, that it has to be a partnership approach between both the housing association and the local authority. So before I hand over to Lawrence at Alma Economics, and for them to take you through the tool itself, I thought it's worth saying that in pretty much all cases, you will find that the flats recycling cost benefit tool will be showing you that it leads to additional financial costs associated with rolling out those improvements. I think across the country, not just in London, we're in a position where there has been historic underinvestment in the provision of waste and recycling services in flats. And in order to improve those services, investment is needed in not just bringing the facilities up to a good standard to start with, but also in terms of maintaining those standards in perpetuity. So when you actually go in and play around with it yourself, you'll notice that on the whole, there's additional financial costs involved. The case, however, for improving recycling facilities on estates isn't just an environmental one. We believe it's one of equality as well, and ensuring that all residents, no matter what housing type they live in, have access to good quality services. And the last thing I'd like to say is that the tool relates to waste and dry recycling services, and at the moment it excludes food. We'll be running an extension to the flats recycling project in the next year, looking at how to improve food waste yields, textiles, and get collections in place for all of those, and updates will follow as that project comes to fruition. I'd like to pass over to Lawrence now from Alma Consulting, just to take you through the principles of the cost benefit tool. Lawrence.
Can I say another thank you to everyone that's attending? It's nice to see such a high level of engagement in this overall process, both in the aims of Resource London, but also in terms of engaging with the tool that we've put together. So the starting point is to discuss what actually is cost benefit analysis. The key part of cost benefit analysis is to very much give users a detailed understanding of what they need to know to make decisions about proceeding. So it provides a full breakdown of costs, and including the ability to play around with those costs, look at different scenarios, look at different cases, and so on. And it splits those costs up between whether they're one-off costs or ongoing costs. But then against that, the bit that's less, you might be less familiar with, is there's a full quantification of the benefits of the policy converted into monetary terms. So, for example, where you lead to an improved experience for residents, that wouldn't naturally be a financial amount, but where there is evidence that can link some of those improvements to the amount that individuals would be willing to pay for that level of improvement. So once you have this full quantification of the monetary value of all costs and the monetary value of all benefits, you can look holistically at the problem and see that in the vast majority of cases, the monetary value of the benefits does exceed the monetary costs for this tool. As Gemma has commented, there is the issue that in terms of financial costs, these will exceed financial benefits, in that most of the benefits are not financial flows. They're mostly things such as improved residents' experience and reduced CO2 emissions, which we can value, but you do not get back as financial savings. Anthony, next slide, please. So in terms of the costs that we've included, I think the first point to make is that these can be customized, but when you're thinking about setting up, there's a likelihood you'll need new bins and refurbishment of existing, or refurbishment of existing bins. You may not. It may be that you already have bins of the right quality ready to go. There's a likelihood of having to invest in refurbishment of bin areas. At the very least, improving lighting is quite common. Then you need the improved communications, particularly the signage and stickers that go with making this scheme so successful in boosting recycling rates. And you will have staff time involved in rolling this out. So when we actually go on to the live demo of the tool, one thing you'll see is that you can select what's most appropriate for you under these assumptions, or you can go for averages effectively, where you're not sure about particular costs. In addition to the setup costs, there'll be ongoing costs. Often most significant is the impact on weekly collection costs, but then there'll be ongoing maintenance and cleaning of bin areas, and occasionally you'll have like infrequent one-off costs. So if you, for example, you reach the full life cycle of a bin, then you'd incur bin costs again, and so on. Anthony, next slide, please. This is the bit that you're probably less familiar with, which is around putting monetary values onto the benefits. So the specific benefits that have been estimated are reduced CO2 emissions from where you have higher levels of recycling, particularly where you're diverting from landfill and energy from waste. Reduced gate fees, which is a financial cost where relevant. Value of materials diverted from energy from waste. But then the biggest category by far is value of improved resident experience in terms of this was not something we necessarily expected when setting out, but once we looked into it, it does make a very significant impact on the well-being of residents, and this is shown to have quite a large monetary value. Anthony, next slide, please. So as well as providing the background to what cost benefit analysis is, I want to talk about the approach we've taken to developing the tool. The first point to note on this is that there is a very clear trade-off between how complex the tool is and how user-friendly it is. So we've really tried to strike the right balance on this in terms of providing users with a high degree of flexibility in terms of being able to adjust inputs to make it most relevant for their own situation. But we've not gone for the absolute full range of flexibility, because in practice that would lead to having to complete many choices, in the order of 100 boxes worth of information to work out costs and benefits of the scheme. And we've tested this as we'll come on to. You can look at scenarios. So there are options for, even if you're not sure of the exact level of costs, you can select whether you might be likely to be in a high cost scenario or a low cost scenario, or you can run the tool more than once. So you might run it with your best guess and then rerun it on a more cautious set of scenarios for yourself to work out what kind of worst case scenario is looking like, or also to understand upside scenarios if the tool in practice, if the scheme in practice turned out to be less costly than in the central case. Anthony, next slide, please. The next point in this is it's been a very collaborative approach in that we've been working with the stakeholders Gemma outlined a few slides ago to firstly really understand what people wanted before we built anything, but then to iterate versions. So we would share our thinking, share our emerging thinking, but then when we had a full prototype of the tool, we shared it for extensive user testing and made changes to make it as much as possible able to give people exactly what they wanted. In terms of what goes into populating the underlying calculations, we feel we've been able to draw on the very best available evidence, particularly the Peabody estate pilot program, which provided a lot of information. We've had site visits, we've had a lot of input from stakeholders on cost assumptions, and then we've been able to sense check those with other stakeholders, engaging with individuals who are particularly informed on actually delivering these costs on the ground. We've built in quite extensive user guidance. What we've done is the majority of this is actually built right into the web tool itself, which Rob will show you in a couple of minutes. The benefit of this is that instead of a user manual, you've got the help function very close to where you need it. So wherever you have a query, there should very nearby be a source of information to help you through that. And lastly, it's key to make sure that outputs can be extracted from the tool. So once you've actually taken the time to run a scenario, you can download everything you've done at the end, and that's available to you offline. It's available if you want to run a number of different scenarios and look at them separately. You've got that available to keep and to share with colleagues who wouldn't need to then directly engage with this tool. So that's hopefully enough of the background of what we're trying to achieve and how we've gone about trying to achieve it. What will make things a lot more clear would be to actually see the tool in practice. So we might have a slight tech delay here because we're going to change who's screen sharing. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rob Dutfield, who will actually go through a live demo of what it's like to actually complete the tool in practice.
Hello everyone. Can people see my screen? I think that's shared. So what I'm going to do now is just walk people through from start to finish, how to sign up for the tool, how to log in, and then how to kind of run through the tool in terms of entering their inputs and extracting the outputs at the back end. So what you need to do to start with is log on to Resource London's website, so resourcelondon.org. Resources, research, and making recycling work for people in flats. And then you click on this green icon here, which is the Flats Recycling Package tool. And that takes you through to this landing page. Now, in the first instance, you'll need to click on this link here. So fill out this form to submit a request for a new account. And you just input your name, your borough organisation, and an email address. What happens at this point is this request will go through to someone from Resource London, and they will get back to you with a username and a password. So I'll just skip that step. But once you have that, then essentially click on this Access the Tool Now link. Wait for it to load. I'll just skip that. So yeah, you just enter your username and password in here. And log in. And yeah, you'll be greeted with this inputs page here. As Lawrence has mentioned, what we're trying to do here is strike a balance between being user-friendly and minimizing the amount of time that people need to spend to actually input data into the tool, whilst also giving users some flexibility to vary key assumptions where information is available. You'll notice at the top as well, there's a couple of buttons. So there's a user guidance, high-level summary, essentially giving users guidance as to how to go about using the tool. And the scenarios are a key aspect of the tool. So there's also further guidance on how to essentially use the right scenarios, which I will try my best to guide you through now. So just scrolling down, and just to note, any input with a star is a required input, and there are a few optional inputs at the bottom where more information is available. So first of all, you'd need to select your borough where applicable, and also your user type. So we understand the main users for this tool are likely to be London boroughs or housing providers. So I'll just select London Borough. So next, you'll need to select a cost scenario. So there's two different cost scenarios you can choose from. So there's a setup cost scenario. There's 5 different options available. As Lawrence alluded to before, those cost scenarios are essentially a way for you to vary the amount of costs based on, say, how difficult the estate is to treat and how good or bad the initial start point is. So if new bins are needed, for example, rather than just a simple refurb, then you might want to select the towards the higher end of the cost spectrum. There is quite detailed guidance when you click on the question mark here. As Lawrence mentioned, help text is embedded throughout this tool. So in this instance, I'm going to go for the high cost scenario. There's also a similar for ongoing costs. So ongoing costs being costs that are incurred year on year, setup costs being those that are upfront. So again, I'm going to go for average on the ongoing costs. Next up, you'll need to select a benefit scenario. So Benefits are primarily driven by the impact of FRP on both waste diverted from residual to recycling, as well as reductions in contamination rates. The data we've used to drive these scenarios flows from the Peabody pilot. So for each of these two, you can choose a high impact, average, or low impact scenario. Essentially, those scenarios are based off of pilot data from the Peabody pilot. So if you wanted to look at what the highest cost, the highest benefit could be, you click on the high. If you thought that benefits might be on the low side because, say, recycling performance is already reasonably good on the estate, then you might want to look at the low scenario. What this does is it gives you the flexibility to kind of understand the range of potential benefits you might expect to see on your estates. So in this instance, I'm going to input high on the residual to recycling scenario and high on the reduction in contamination rates. Next up, so estate characteristics are quite key in terms of driving the aggregate impact of the flats recycling package. So in these inputs, you will input the characteristics of the estate that you're looking to treat with the flats recycling package. You can actually model more than one estate at any one time. However, we'd recommend that you model estates on a state by estate basis if estates vary quite significantly in terms of their underlying characteristics. So if they vary across in terms of number of households or number of blocks, or if bin areas are quite different in terms of their sizes between different estates. So as an example, I'm just going to model for us one estate. As mentioned, there are default inputs which can be overridden. So I'm just going to stick with the defaults in this particular instance, but you can vary the households per estate, the number of blocks per estate, the bin areas per block, the recycling bins per bin area, and the rubbish bins per bin area. And these need to be averages. And next up, we're asking users to make some assumptions around collections. So first up, users would need to input the size of the bins they're looking to install on the particular estate. Understand that some estates may have multiple different bin sizes, so we'd recommend that people choose the bin size that most closely matches the kind of average bin size on the estate. So in this instance, I'm going to go with 1,100 litres. You need to input a number of materials that are collected. So if it's just kind of everything's collected at once, you would just input one. If it's multi-source, you might input 2 or 3 here. In this instance, I'm just going to put down 1. Just so we understand, just for the calculation of costs, as we're looking at additional costs, we need to understand recycling bins per bin area before FRP was implemented. So I'm just going to say that there is no change in the number of bins. Next up, we need to make some assumptions around recycling collections. So this is where you input the collection frequency. It's probably at this stage quite important to look at the user guidance. So if recycling frequency is twice weekly, you want to enter 2, once weekly enter 1, and fortnightly enter 0.5. So I'm just going to say that recycling is collected before FRP was implemented once a week, and this next box is looking at after FRP is implemented. There's a minimum standard in terms of the capacity of recycling waste collected per week as part of FRP. So, and one of the outputs of this tool will actually be as per the inputs you've inputted. What does that look like? So you may need to kind of iterate this model to ensure that that standard's met. But this particular box, we're looking at the frequency of recycling collections with FRP. So I'm going to say that it's exactly the same as it was before. The next box is looking at the frequency of residual waste collections. Because what you might see as you switch waste from residual to recycling is that less residual waste collections may be needed. So in this box, I'm going to say for FRP, residual waste was collected fortnightly, once weekly. But as a result of implementing FRP, that only needs to be collected fortnightly. So I'm going to enter 2. Lastly, within that particular category of inputs, so several of the benefits are measured with reference to where waste would go if it wasn't recycled. So there's an option here for you to select what the alternative waste disposal method is. So there's the option of energy from waste, which I understand is very common in London, but also landfill and a mix based on the London average. So I'm going to go over the mix in the first instance. Next, so for each of the cost categories, we've given users the input to vary which party incurs those costs. We understand that this can vary quite significantly between different boroughs and different situations. So each of these drop downs and the categories are summarized in the question marks again. You can select which party incurs the costs, and this will flow through to the outputs in terms of how the costs and benefits are allocated. So I'm just going to run through these. So in terms of new bins, purchase and maintenance, I'm going to say that sits with the London Borough. Bin area refurbishment, so that sits with the housing provider. Project management costs, I'm going to say sits with the housing provider. This is all hypothetical, by the way. Regular cleaning, I'm going to say sits with the housing provider. Monthly officer inspections, the housing provider. Stickers and posters, product costs sit with the London Borough. Design costs to sit with the London Borough. We then understand there's a dynamic that often occurs between boroughs and housing providers, in which boroughs rent bins to housing providers. So we've added functionality to take account of that in terms of how costs are allocated. But in this situation, I'm just going to say that bin rental doesn't apply for simplicity. And additional recycling waste collections, I'm going to say that cost sits with the London Borough. So those are all of the compulsory inputs. Additionally, where additional information is available, there's the option to add in some local data. So first of all, one of the outputs of the tool is the uplift or potential uplift in the household dry recycling rate as a result of implementing FRP. As a default, this is based off of the volumes and the recycling rate of the borough, but you can localize that to the particular estates that are treated if you input your own data. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to say dry recycling tonnage before FRP was implemented was 10 tons per annum out of a total household waste tonnage of 100. And there's also the input, to the extent you have the costs at hand, of inputting, just to give more robust estimates, waste disposal costs that are local to the borough. So There's residual waste disposal costs, which would consist of your landfill and your gate fees. I'm going to input 180. Your gate fees for recycling treatment, I input 30. And the cost of contamination. I should just note here that Resource London already have a toolkit available to help you pull together estimates of this particular cost. But as an example, I'm just going to add in 180.
Rob, can I just interrupt you? Sorry, it's Anthony. Just briefly, because there's a couple of questions that are coming in that I think are pertinent to just put in now, and they're questions on the frequency, because I think you put 2 in for the frequency, but obviously if it's going to fortnightly, the questions are, should it have been 0.5 for fortnightly, not 2? And I'm just conscious that when you then therefore go, just want to say you can share, so fortnightly 0.5. Otherwise it's going to kick out the wrong results for people when they see it. So thanks to Phil and Barbara for both putting that in the Q&A section. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, that's a good catch, and that's why I should have read the help text. Once everything's inputted, I will just press the submit button. Okay, and that takes you through to the outputs pages. So the way these work is there's a little box here where you can toggle between your different types of outputs. The first page you come to is overall net cost, and what this gives you is your overall. And I just note this is all calculated over a 10-year horizon, which is somewhat arbitrary, but you do get the breakdown below. So you get the overall net cost over 10 years to the London Borough, to the housing provider, as well as a net cost to society. As Lawrence alluded to before, this includes not just costs and benefits that accrue to housing providers and boroughs, but also to wider society in terms of improved resident experience and reduced carbon emissions. So these two won't necessarily add up to your net societal cost. And then if you scroll down, you also get the profile of costs for London boroughs and housing providers over the 10 years time horizon that we've provided. As you'll see, the costs are quite heavily concentrated upfront, as there are a number of kind of upfront one-off costs in year 0. So just scrolling up, I'm going to now look at, I'll come back to the key performance indicators and look at detailed costs. So this kind of gives you a similar breakdown, but it splits out between the setup costs, which are summarized here. Again, split between London boroughs and housing providers, and the ongoing costs, or the costs that are incurred year on year. I should just note that these costs are aggregate and they're not netted off by benefits in this instance. Now I'll go back to the key performance indicators. So yeah, this is a range of interesting metrics, including costs and benefits. So first up, you'll see your household dry recycling rate before implementing the flats recycling package. And then the next number is the post-intervention household dry recycling rate. So in this particular instance, we see a 7.7 percentage point increase in the dry recycling rate from implementing FRP. The next two metrics are driven by the scenarios that you select, which again are flow from the Peabody pilot experience. So these are more inputs, but they're good for reference. So you'll see the implied uplift in dry recycled waste volumes from implementing FRP, and reduction in the contamination rate of dry recycling in percentage points. Next, we've estimated the CO2 emissions abated in terms of tonnes per year from implementing FRP, and that's driven by essentially sending less waste to landfill or energy from waste. This is the metric I was talking about before. So it gives you an estimate of your dry recycling bin capacity per household in treated flats in terms of litres per household per week. I understand the target for the flats recycling package, the standard, is 60 or above. So in this instance, we know that we're offering sufficient capacity to residents. And lastly, just to give you an idea of, we've given kind of the aggregate number of the amount of cost and benefit, but this gives you an idea of the cost per household. So it's cost per household for London boroughs, housing providers, and the net cost to society, or in this case, a benefit per household. So next, I'll scroll to the last outputs page, which is detailed benefits. So we've already shown several of these benefits, but what we've done here is convert the benefits to a monetary basis, just to make it kind of measurable and consistent. So we've calculated the monetary benefit of carbon dioxide abatement. So that's essentially your emissions valued at a social cost of carbon estimate. There's an estimate of the cost reduction from waste disposal. So it's essentially that's your reduced gate fees and landfill tax from switching from more expensive landfill and energy from waste to disposal via recycling. So as you notice on the inputs page, we assumed that residual waste frequency could reduce as a result of implementing FRP and switching some of the waste to recycling. So there's a monetary benefit of that. There's a monetary benefit in terms of the value of waste diverted from landfill to recycling. So for every ton of glass that you don't send to landfill, that's a ton of glass that can be reused. And as Lawrence alluded to, often the largest benefit of recycling we've estimated is the value of improved resident experience. And we've used some estimates from the economic literature to measure the size of that impact. So that, again, that's the value inherent in kind of, firstly, people value recycling as a service, but also there are kind of benefits in terms of cleanliness and the pleasantness of the immediate environment as a result of implementing FRP, making the bin areas essentially in a nicer state. And that all adds up to a total social benefit of FRP. And the last thing I want to show you is all these outputs, and you may be running this tool multiple times. So what we've added in is functionality to extract this data into an Excel format. So to do that, you just press this blue button here, download model outputs. And that'll take you through to this Excel here. So it's largely as you've seen before, but there's just 2 additional pages I'd like to guide you towards. So as people may be running this tool multiple times, there's a page that just stores the inputs you've entered into the tool and in a particular model run. So everything we inputted on the inputs page. And next, there is a detailed summary of the costs. So as you notice in the tool, we split the cost between setup costs and ongoing costs, and this gives you an estimate of how the costs break down on a more granular level across different areas. So, for example, setup costs we've split into new bins, refurbishing your bin areas, etc., and the same for your ongoing costs. So yeah, we think that if people want that extra detail, it's there for you to see. And I think that concludes the demo. So I'm just going to unshare my screen and pass it back to Anthony.
Great.
Anthony, would you mind if I just draw people's attention on the homepage of the actual tool itself? If people are interested in understanding what the assumptions, the general assumptions and the cost assumptions are behind the actual tool, they can download the PDFs there.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Gemma. So we actually don't have any open live questions, but there are a few things that I would just like to draw people's attention to, the questions that came through while Rob was presenting. The first is just a point of clarification. We are recording this webinar, so we'll send out the link to where it's posted. It'll be posted up onto LWARB's YouTube channel, and we will share the link with everyone that registered for today, so you can go back and you'll be able to watch Rob's tutorial to give you a bit of help as you go through. Just a point that I wanted to make, actually, that Rob did kind of hovered over a couple of them. So everywhere on the model as you're going through it, you'll see in quite a few places a little blue question mark, and as Rob showed when we had that well-spotted query from Phil and Barbara about fortnightly, if you hover over that, that's just a little help button, and it will give you a bit of clarity on what's expected to be filled in at that point. And then there was a question as well from Matthew Homer, which is in the Q&A, but just draw people's attention to it. So it was the CO2, is the CO2 output relative to landfill or EFW? And Gemma's clarified that in the Q&A section, but it's relative to whatever you set the disposal route as at the start on the input screen. And as Rob showed you, you can go back and check what you put in as the parameters for running the model, and so you can check what you put in. And obviously, if you put it in as landfill and you should have put it as EFW, then you can just go back into the model and switch that over, and it will give you the output relative to your actual disposal route. So I can't see any other live questions at the moment. So hopefully everything has made perfect sense to you all. If you do have any burning questions that you think of once you've finished with the webinar today, then do send them through, and we will put them together, and we'll put out some frequently asked questions if we get a lot of questions back through. So I think I made an error, and Gemma corrected me, that we're actually due to finish at 2:45 rather than 3. So I think all that remains for me to share is the next steps, really. So if you're registering for the tool, then the web address is shown here, and you just fill in your details and then click. A number of you, I'm aware, have already registered for the site, but you haven't as of yet received your log-on details, and that's because we were waiting until we'd had this webinar and officially launched it. So you will be receiving by the end of today your log-on details, so that you can get onto the tool and start having a play around with data relevant to your own authority. And so I think that's everything from us. It just remains for me to say thank you to Gemma, and thank you to Rob, Lawrence, and Eric, all from Alma Economics. for taking us through the tool and for helping us develop the tool, and to say thank you as well to the user group that we work with in developing this tool. I hope that you will find it useful and effective way, and as I say, we are here if you have any further questions once you get into the tool yourselves. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons, and we'll hopefully see many of you or speak to many of you in the near future. Thanks.